Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent today, Tim. I hope all of the listeners out there are having a fantastic day as well. Very excited to bring this brand new, very old cold case to the listeners. But before we get to that, Tim, the question of the day, the question of the week, dare I say. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you very much for asking. The question of the week. Wow, I feel like there's a lot of pressure now. I really don't have any great answers. I'm fine. But I'm excited to introduce this episode with our friend Christy Arnhart, who has been on the show before. And previously, maybe about 6 months ago, she came on our show and spoke about the disappearance of Brooke Allensworth. And so we get into that a little bit at the top of this conversation with Christy, just kind of speaking about any updates in that case. And Brooke Allensworth was last seen on July 12th, 2018 in Independence County, Arkansas. She was 37 at the time, 5'8", and 180 pounds.
And if anybody has any information on Brooke Allensworth, they are instructed to contact the Arkansas State Police at 501-618-8000.
And so we speak about Brooke's disappearance at the very beginning of the episode, but most of this conversation with Christy is about the unsolved murder of Robbin Burgette from Gila County, Arizona. And in March of 1978, 16-year-old Robbin was left home to babysit and was sadly found brutally murdered.
And to add to the tragedy of this brutal murder, she was found by her brother Chad, who, by all accounts, had a very close relationship with her. She was found on her bed, covered in blood. I can't even imagine the shock and the PTSD that this young boy went through and is still coping with today.
And if you have any information about what happened to Robbin, please call the Phoenix Police at 602-262-6011.
And one thing that stands out to me every time we speak with Christy, she does such a great job extracting information from these cold cases that on the surface don't have a lot out there, especially the ones that take place more than 30 years ago, 40 years ago. These historic cases that had no DNA, didn't have the type of media coverage, didn't have the type of law enforcement applied investigation as ones today do, but we still managed to get as much information as possible from Christy about Robbin's murder. Always impressive having a conversation with her because of her due diligence in her research.
And Christy is big on social media. She's on Instagram and TikTok as Crime Christy, so you can find her there. She also works with John Lorden on Brain Scratch and Searchlight and Case Cracked as well.
And while this conversation is informative with the sponsors, where can one go if they wanted to hear this conversation plus all of our other episodes without the sponsors?
Well, listeners can subscribe to Missing Premium right there in their Apple Podcasts app, or non-Apple users can go to missing.supportingcast.fm and subscribe to Missing Premium there. You get every episode ad-free, plus our weekly bonus show.
And one final question, Tim. If someone wanted to find us on social media, where are the easiest places they could do this?
Well, listeners can find us at Missing CSM on social media. Welcome back to the podcast. Christy Arnhart, how are you today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing great today. When we fired up the Zoom, I totally forgot that you had your background there with the peacock feathers, and you have this like amazing space age chair that you operate from. So it makes me think like what's in front of you is what is the equivalent of a air traffic control flight deck.
I got a nice little setup, but you know, it's more just two screens and camera and mic.
Sounds like a control system to me.
Yeah, where you're looking up these missing people, and one of them is like plugged into the dark web, and the other one is plugged into a database or the FBI's most wanted.
I'm sitting here in low light, hunched over my keyboard.
Yeah.
So, Christy, you joined us here before on the Missing podcast to speak about the disappearance of Brooke Allensworth.
Yes,
And that is a really mysterious case. And are there any updates in that case that you can share?
there are. For one thing, the cell phone has still not been broken, gotten into, whatever the terms are for it. Arkansas State Police still has that, and it has been so long. This really should have been done. I don't know, it just makes you feel like something's going on, because I've talked with other people in law enforcement, and it does not take this long. I'll just leave it up to them. But the phone, we still don't know what's in it. Right now, really what I'm telling people to do, if you live in Arkansas, especially in north central Arkansas, watch when you're out hunting, you're hiking, things like that. Unfortunately, a lot of these cases end with a death. And if hers does, we need to be conscious, of our surroundings. So keep your eyes open.
And this happened in July of 2018. Can you just give a brief reminder and overview of how her car was found in the area?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe it was mid to late July that this went on. Her car was found under the White River Bridge in the oil trough area at a boat ramp that leads down into the White River. Her car was pulled off to the side in one of the parking places where you can't see it from the bridge above. The doors were locked. Her cigarettes, personal items, they were in the car locked up. Nobody spoke of seeing her down there. It sat there for a couple of weeks before the family actually started to report her missing, before police actively went down there. And they had noted the car, but they hadn't actually looked at it or done anything with it. Now, unfortunately, because she was missing or is still missing, they swabbed the car for DNA, but the DNA, they said, didn't offer anything to the case that would help them solve it. There's not a lot to go on. The car had a flat tire. There had been talk that a friend had helped her, maybe her sister had helped her to fix a flat in it, and it ran out somewhere in the oil trough Newport area down there. Like I said, nobody was seen picking her up. No friends were called. I know that she wasn't in exactly the right state of mind when she disappeared, because it was reported that she had 2 left shoes on. She originally went to a mechanic to see about getting the flat tire fixed. The mechanic noted how she acted, noticed her shoes. She ended up leaving and not having anything done with the tire. So somewhere in there, the Fix-A-Flat came in, and that never works for long. But, there's been no contact whatsoever. There were searches done, flyers, everything that we can do to look for a missing person. And there have been no sightings. There's been no activity, which unfortunately makes you think the worst, which is why I'm asking everyone to keep their eyes open.
Thank you for spreading the word on that. I think that's appropriate, knowing some of the details in Brooke's case.
And if anybody does have any information on Brooke's disappearance, they are instructed to contact the Independence County Sheriff's Office at 870-793-8838 or the Arkansas State Police Company F at 870-931-0043.
Okay, now, Christy, we emailed a little bit about a different tragic case, and can you tell us how the unsolved murder of Robbin Burgette came to you?
Well, this is one of those that you see so much synchronicity and whatnot in it, you feel like you have to follow this and you have to do something to help it. We have community managers over at Lord Nart's that help us, take care of comments and things like that. One of the ladies, Laura Rodriguez, came across this this murder case in Arizona. She grew up during the time that this young woman was murdered. She grew up in the same area. They had a lot of the same likes and dislikes. She also noticed the cemetery Robbin is buried in. Mrs. Rodriguez's niece had been murdered years ago. Her niece is buried in the same cemetery with Robbin. She lives 8 miles from Robbin's brother, Chad. So there's just a lot of little things that pointed her this way. And once she had a passion for it, I could really see how much help this needed.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for bringing this to us. And yeah, can you tell us a little bit about Robin? How old was she, and where was she from?
Oh, yeah. Robin was 16 years old in March of 1978 when all of this happened. She was living in an apartment with her mother, Carol, and her brother, Chad. Chad was 11. The father, I think that they had been divorced for quite some years because he wasn't in the picture at this point. Now, on March 10th, the family decided that they were going to go out of town. It was a Friday. They were going to go out of town and stay until the following Sunday. Robin didn't want to take the trip. At this point, she had quit high school. She was working babysitting jobs around town. There was actually apartment buildings near hers that she would go to and babysit for people. That weekend, she was supposed to be staying with a friend while she did the babysitting jobs. That way she wouldn't be at their apartment building alone the whole time. Unfortunately, when mother and son came back, that's when it all fell apart. Chad wanted to get into the house and see his sister first. They had a close relationship. The front door was locked, so he went around to the back, and the back door was slightly ajar. He goes into the house to look for Robin, and he finds her in her bedroom. She's on the floor. She's been stabbed. She has blunt force trauma, and she's dead. Now, it gets confusing when you start looking at the investigation here. Nothing in the house was taken. There wasn't any evidence of this intruder in the house at all. Everything they found was contained in her bedroom. And as far as I know, the only thing that was recovered was DNA because she had been sexually assaulted. Now, the DNA results would come back to two different individuals. When police started looking into who might have motive to do this, they found that there were several people who had been making threats against Robin. She's a young girl. She's babysitting for these families. Unfortunately, some of the fathers had hit on her and the mothers had caught wind of it. So there had been some threats thrown around, some angry people. There was at least one gentleman at one of the apartment buildings that she was working at who was coming on to her sexually, and it made her very uncomfortable. She had complained about it before. And when they talked to the girl that Robin went and stayed with the weekend her family was gone, she said that, yeah, Robin stayed here. She actually left on, I think it was the 11th. Yeah, she left at about 8 p.m. and told her friends she was going back to her apartment to have her boyfriend over to cook him dinner. Well, somewhere in between the time that 8 p.m. and the 5 p.m. when the mother and son got back, that's the window that this murder happened. People at the apartment buildings say they didn't hear anything out of place. They didn't see anyone out of place, but nobody could verify that her boyfriend had showed up for dinner either. Now, I also know that people in these apartment buildings didn't want to mess with the police and they didn't want to be involved in something like this. So they knew there were a lot of people who were keeping their mouths shut. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like they ever said anything. Now, to make matters worse, this was a really busy time, I realized, for Phoenix police. There was a lot that happened during this summer. But I almost felt like, they said they had trouble questioning people. Robin didn't just have one boyfriend, that she had been dating several people, some she had broke up with. So they're constantly complaining about, there's so many people we have to track down. We're trying to find all of her boyfriends. And I do know they talked to one guy who said he was her boyfriend, and he didn't have dinner with her that night, nothing. But who's to say that was even the guy she was talking about? She's 16. She's not in school. So she's out having some fun.
Right. Okay. So the actual boyfriend that she allegedly had plans with is still not known?
It's not in any of the police reports that we can find. It's not in any of the news reports either. He went unnamed, but police said that they had cleared it.
And I just want to set the location in my head. This is an apartment complex that is a gated community, or is it more like a standalone apartment building?
I don't know. I mean, this was the poorer area of town. So you might have just had apartment buildings sitting near each other.
Okay. And she was babysitting for other families within the complex.
Not within the complex that she lived in other complexes near hers.
I see. So when she leaves, she still won't have that far to go before
No.
she gets to her. So, okay, I'm picturing it now. All right. And people in the complex that she was babysitting, she had already had issues with, I almost said gentlemen, with men hitting on her.
Yes.
Including the fathers of the children that she was babysitting.
Some of them, yeah.
And that caused tension between the mom and the 16-year-old girl?
Yes, I know. You would think that they would go after their husband, the one who was making the mistake, but I guess that's what jealousy brought them into.
Right. And there was one particular individual who Robbin had complained about being hit on in a sexual manner numerous times.
Yes.
And who was she complaining to? Her family?
Yes. Yes, she had mentioned it to her mother.
Was his identity ever revealed or what? No.
Have no idea who he was.
So that person who apparently made passes at her several times wasn't the parent of one of her the kids that she babysat?
No, this was a totally different person.
Well, that's pretty alarming right there, that someone had tried several times to, come on to her or whatever.
It is.
And she found it alarming enough to tell other people about.
It is. And it's so sad. I mean, she's still just a kid.
Well, speaking of just a kid, her brother discovered the body, and her brother was 11 years old. They had a great relationship. That's 11 years old, and she was 16. So I know a lot of growing up happens between those 2 years, but they probably were like buddies. When I read that, I was like, it just felt like they were buddies. Like he's excited to go back home, see his sister. What in the world does someone like that? How does somebody process that? How does a boy process that?
I don't think you can. I know it scarred him. He's talked about it multiple times in the media. He just wants to know what happened to his sister. You never get over something like that. And speaking of, her mother, Carol, was so heartbroken by what had happened. She was a diabetic. And as time started to wear on after Robbin's death, she quit taking her insulin and within 3 years died. So there he is again, left alone.
We talk about secondary victims a lot, and right there you have a boy who is now a functioning member of society, but still scarred from this, and a mom who shut down completely.
Yeah.
She had to take insulin. She didn't do it. In 3 years, she died.
Yes. That's so sad.
It is sad. I mean, and selfish isn't even the right word, because this is a situation where the perpetrator was sexually aroused by Robbin to the point where her fending him off drove him into a frenzy.
Yeah.
So this is a sexually driven crime.
Yes. Yes, it is. And I mean, she was stabbed. She had blunt force trauma. There was blood everywhere. It was a very violent death. So, but it also begs the question, if they found two samples, are both samples people who broke into the house? Or was one of those consensual and the other is from the break-in?
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And do we have any further detail on the DNA?
No, it's been put into all of law enforcement's databases. Neither one has ever come up with anybody. This one needs genetic genealogy very bad.
Okay, and to just backtrack real quick on this DNA, you said it could be that one was consensual and one wasn't. So what you're saying is that the DNA that was collected as a result of a sexual encounter, whether it was a consensual one or a not consensual one.
Right.
Or they both could be non-consensual.
That's true. I mean, we just have no idea.
And when was the DNA gathered?
It was actually gathered during the autopsy when they did the rape kit. And they were even able to tell back then that they had 2 samples from 2 different people, but they couldn't tell much else from it.
In 1978.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Now, tell me about the break-in or the details about the back door being ajar. Is this a sign of forced entry into the house?
None.
No sign of forced entry. So
None.
So the killer was let into the house and then likely left out the back door?
Mm-hmm. He was, and I've thought about this a couple of different ways. He was either let in, or if the first sample was consensual, that person could have left through the back door. Maybe it didn't shut all the way. Maybe he left it unlocked and the guy just came in, but they didn't find any fingerprints on the door. The police always said she knew her attacker. Everything I've saw says the same thing. She knew who her attacker was. She let them in.
How was she in contact with the attacker or even her other boyfriends? Just via phone?
Yeah, I know when she was at her friend's house, she had talked to her boyfriend over the phone and was like, I'm going to go home and cook dinner, come over and have dinner.
Okay, so they knew about that one, and that was the one they cleared.
Well, they say they talked to a boyfriend. I don't know that it's the same guy, because this guy says he never went to her apartment that night, didn't see her that night, nothing. And she did have several people that she was either seeing or talking to. So who's to say that was the same one?
So he didn't even have plans with her that night?
No.
Right.
No indication that this was a robbery gone wrong?
Nothing missing from the house.
Okay.
Nothing touched. No evidence whatsoever anywhere but in her bedroom.
Had she ever stated before, just based on the fact that she had complained about somebody, an older man, hitting on her, had there ever been any other indication that somebody had followed her or maybe knew where she lived? Guess a couple questions. Did this person know where she lived, do you know? Or was there anybody else that she had mentioned who she was keeping an eye out for?
She didn't mention anyone else. She didn't mention people following her home. But whoever this was knew she would be home alone that weekend, because this was an odd occasion. This is something that she never had done before. Well, either they followed her and knew she was alone, or they knew beforehand. And I'm sure she didn't keep it a secret. She had a job that weekend.
Was this a consensual sexual encounter?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah. So we don't know if she was raped or not.
No, honestly, when it comes right down to it, we don't. Now, I would say with the murder having happened, the violence, I would say she was. But yeah, speaking to the facts, don't know.
Seems like the investigation's holding things pretty close to the chest with some of the details. Is that how you read it as well?
It is. It is.
This case is like 44 years old.
I know. And, her brother, we don't live forever. He won't be around a whole great longer. He really wants to know what's happened here, because you've potentially got 2 people out there who've been under police's radar for all these years for something as heinous as this.
And you would think that if the first DNA sample was taken as a result of a consensual sexual encounter, that person might come forward.
Yeah, you would think so.
Actually, I can't say that. I said it and I was thinking to myself, maybe somebody is out there thinking that was a consensual sexual encounter that I had, but what is stopping the police from just arresting me just to close the case?
Well, and it's a cultural type thing too. When you live in places like this, yeah, you tend to keep to yourself. I mean, I don't necessarily live in the best part of town either. And yeah, I try to keep my head down. And I know even the walls in these apartments, I know that they were thin. So I really feel like they're just people who didn't say a word, didn't want to get involved. And I hate that. Yeah,
you did say that in the beginning, that pretty much everybody in the complex kept their mouths closed about this.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then when you start questioning people at the other apartment buildings, especially wives who had made threats and things like that, it gets harder to ferret out that information too. So they did have a hard time chasing everybody down that they could find.
And what are your thoughts regarding the investigation? How was it handled? How did they handle the family members, especially Chad? And how did they portray Robbin? How did they see her as the victim?
Well, as far as Chad goes, I don't really know. And back then I would assume he was given a shoulder to cry on, and that was probably about it. I don't have anything in any of the notes or articles that say anything else about him until he's an adult. Now, as far as Robbin goes and her investigation, it's not said explicitly, of course, but I always felt like they were slut shaming and victim shaming here. We're trying to track down all her boyfriends, but this is difficult. And, she was a dropout. So she ran around. There was all kinds of statements made by detectives that made it sound like, well, she was out there running around loose anyway. What do you think's going to happen?
She's 16.
I know.
My God.
I know.
She was out there running around. What do you think's going to happen? Well, I certainly don't think that she's going to get brutally stabbed and raped.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, that makes me angry.
Yeah, me too. No reason to put it out there in the public that she's a dropout. It has nothing to do with her murder.
Mm-hmm.
It's just trying to paint a less sympathetic victim, so the public cares less and is less critical of the police department.
Yeah, and even today, I know the case is still open, but nothing has been done on it. I'm sure that, and I hope that they periodically check, these DNA samples through databases to see if anybody eventually kicks up. But with all the time that has passed, all the witnesses who have died or disappeared, stuff that's been forgotten, I just really feel like genetic genealogy, it would do it.
You did mention there was a lot going on. You said a lot had happened in that area at that time. What had happened?
Well, in the summer of 1978, Arizona law enforcement, they had 211 active murder investigations at that time. Now, to make matters worse, 3 months after Robbin's death, Bob Crane from Hogan's Heroes got murdered. That opened up a whole investigation. That July, murderers Gary Tyson and Randy Greenwalt escaped from an Arizona state prison in Florence. And they helped other people escape from prisons and literally just went on a killing rampage. 6 people got killed. The whole state was in fear of them because they were still on the loose. It wasn't until August that they finally put that to rest. So, cops in the Phoenix area, they had their hands full. I see that. But it doesn't make Robbin any less important.
No, and it doesn't make sense why there's not a, with DNA advancements, this isn't moved forward in some way. As you mentioned, genetic genealogy,
Mm-hmm.
They can probably place a phone call to Othram Labs and cut some kind of deal with them to send their sample over.
Yeah.
But I guess there's no guarantee that these samples are from the killer, though, huh?
No, there's really not. But it's the only other lead that I can see anyone has to go on.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
What about any evidence? Was there anything that was collected and is still in storage?
If there is, I don't know about it. It wasn't listed anywhere. The only thing that was talked about was the DNA that was taken from her. I know they swabbed for fingerprints and things like that, but obviously they didn't get anything usable or they would have said something. I don't believe there was anything left behind by the killer, anything like that. I think it was just the DNA evidence.
How much communication do you have with investigators, not specifically in this cold case, but, in your work?
Well, off and on. It depends on how deeply I'm digging into something. Yeah, I've contacted law enforcement for, say, Brooke Allensworth's case. I've done it for a few others. This one, I haven't pursued that far yet, but that doesn't mean it's not about to happen.
Okay, so she had been brought home early,
Mm-hmm.
and then she was found murdered in her place. So that, I guess the killer obviously knew where she lived, unless they were walking by and saw her get dropped off and snuck around the back or something like that. But it does seem like this is possibly someone she invited to be there initially.
It does. It makes you want to agree with the police that, yeah, she knew this person. It's just the two people that confuses me. That throws a lot of other possibilities in there.
I don't want to downplay the police investigation, but I mean, you don't need to be formally trained in law enforcement to see a door that's ajar, no forced entry, and she had told a friend that she was going to be making dinner for her boyfriend to say that she probably let somebody in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the police saying that doesn't impress me at all. It's, I mean, if you read one detective book, you will know that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty common sense.
Yeah,
it was.
I mean, I think a lot of detective work is really, when you get down to it. But getting a hold of that person or figuring that out is the question. That's the key,
right.
I guess.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, I guess that separates it from someone that she invited over versus a stranger who probably, just saw her getting out of the car. That means that I would say that detail would make the stranger much less likely.
Mm-hmm.
It's just remarkable to me that it's known she spoke on the phone with a friend, told that friend that I'm going to have my boyfriend. I'm assuming she used her boyfriend's name to her friend instead of just saying my boyfriend. Either way, her friend probably knew who this person was, right?
You would think so. I don't know. Maybe this was somebody she had met on her own. Maybe it wasn't somebody that was known around the complexes or that her friend knew.
Was her friend questioned by police?
She was, and she stated just very basically that, yeah, she came over and stayed. She left early Saturday night to go fix dinner for her boyfriend at the apartment. That's it.
Makes me wonder how she made plans with this person.
You would think it was either somebody who lived at one of these apartment complexes, especially the one she was working at, so she could have talked to them, or she just called them on the phone.
But wouldn't they have a record if she called? I mean, you would think that they interviewed all those people, that if she had called people.
You would think so. I don't feel, and I could be wrong here, I don't want to insult people who did a better job than I'm giving them credit for, but I don't think that they dug that deep.
Well, that would be a poor investigation if they didn't.
I know.
Because like you said, Lance, like that's common sense shit. Like, get your shit together if you can't figure that out.
No, I think they just let prejudices lead the way.
For sure. And you mentioned Bob Crane's death, and you mentioned the prison escape. Those things, like the prison, they caught them. Like, they never went back and looked at this. Like, they never buttoned up one thing and said, "Oh yeah, that murdered girl." It's just astonishing to me that something can go over 4 decades cold when it seems like it could have been pretty efficiently brought to a conclusion within a few months.
Yeah. Yeah, if they'd have given it the effort that it would take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we're being redundant here, but I just want to be clear again. The DNA that was found, there's no identity placed on the 2 samples of DNA. The boyfriend that she was making dinner for wasn't the boyfriend that was cleared.
We don't know if it was or not.
But there was a boyfriend that was
cleared.
There
was a boyfriend who was cleared. Yes. And I have a feeling that they use the term boyfriend loosely too. Yeah, I think there might have been, like there were some people that she had went out with. I don't think they were necessarily her boyfriends. Again, that just makes her look loose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Was she actually cooking dinner, or had she cooked dinner?
I didn't get anything else about the rest of the house. Just that no evidence was found. Nothing was disturbed. Just her bedroom itself. But those are very good questions. Yeah.
It sucks when we talk about these and we just reach a point where we're like, I don't know what else to say, because that's the info that we have. There's a lot of the same info out there on her.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? That pretty much everything you look at, there's not an article that gives you something brand new, right?
Right.
How many sources are you pulling from, do you think?
I don't even think it was as much as 10.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot that you can find out there on her. Even going back through newspapers.com and stuff like that, there's just not a lot on it.
Yeah, it does make you feel like if someone killed her and raped her and killed her and left DNA evidence, it sounds like this person would have acted again. I mean, it's just everything.
Oh, yeah.
Everything we've learned from doing this suggests that.
Yes.
So hopefully they're still running that DNA in CODIS, because this person or people could still slip up. But yeah, I mean, some genetic genealogy would be a more proactive approach for sure.
Yes, it would. Aside from having them actively start from the beginning to go through this. And like I said, I mean, people move. This was so many years ago. I don't even think that a lot of these apartment complexes are standing anymore. I mean, you would really have to start over at square one. That's why I latched on to genetic genealogy right in the beginning, because it seemed like the simplest avenue to take. But not everyone can afford it. Not all cases get it.
And what do you know about the type of life that she had and Chad had? I know you said that their father wasn't in the picture anymore, but they obviously weren't extraordinarily well-to-do.
No.
Sort of living paycheck to paycheck. Is there anything you can tell us about her personal life?
Yes, from what I could tell, Robbin was happy and her family was happy. They horseback rode all the time. They swam. She loved to be barefoot in the summers. Summer was her favorite time. And they were always out hiking around a lake, like I said, riding horses, doing something. So I know that they were poor, but she had a good childhood. It looked like her mother was doing all she could for them.
Is there anything else, Christy, about Robbin's case that you'd like to share here?
Just that I can feel the urgency. Like I said, Chad's not going to be alive forever, and he's starting to get on up into years now. This is one of those that should have been solved so long ago. And the fact that it's hanging out today is embarrassing, really. So please, if you lived in Phoenix around this time, if you remember this murder, anything, please contact the authorities in Phoenix. I mean, even the smallest thing could be important. We know people saw things. We know people heard things. And it's okay to come forward now. I mean, there's no repercussions. We just need information. Her brother needs information.